Well, it was better than the last two. I just got back home from watching Scream 7, Thursday night, preview night, 7 p.m. showtime. I don't want to take too long with this review, but you know how it tends to be with me. My overall reaction to this movie, and I was curious because I'd heard that some original people were coming back, like, I don't know, writer or whatever. Some of the OGs were returning. And I'm not referring just to the actors like Neve Campbell or Courteney Cox, but people behind the scenes. It was an interesting theater experience. The auditorium was pretty crowded and the crowd was very vocal. My gosh, I don't think I've been in a more vocal crowd at a horror film. I mean, I guess I could have been aggravated, but it was funny a bit because people were talking to the screen. Don't do that. You know, that typical thing. Yeah, it was like that. There is a mid-credit scene. So if you're interested, stick around to check it out. It's not anything that makes or breaks the story, just kind of, you know, fun. I do feel that it was written quite a bit better than the last couple of films. Now, the Scream franchise, it's been going pretty steady for many years. Obviously, the first one is the best. None of them have really been able to surpass that. It's the same case with this movie. However, this movie is one of the stronger sequels. I didn't mind 2 and 3. Haven't seen 4, but maybe once. I was kind of intrigued by the different take they were going with Scream 5 because they were trying to branch off into, you know, new characters and stuff. And there were parts about Scream 5 that I enjoyed. I didn't like Scream 6 as much. I felt that the writing was pretty doggone bad. The tropes were ridiculous, and there are tropes in here too, but they felt a little bit more grounded than they did in Scream 6. You know how Scream was very self-aware. There are self-aware things that happen in here, or specifically when they're talking about Sidney Prescott being past her prime because she's not a young thing anymore, and references to her being absent in the last movie. You know, I should have come to New York to be with you. I should have been there to support you. Multiple times that was referenced. There was something also that was said about people not being fans of Stab, which is the movie in the Scream movies that's about Scream. Whatever. People not being fans of Stab, but being fans of Sidney Prescott. When that line was said, I just couldn't help but think it was sort of a reference to the narrative that was thrown around after Halloween Ends came out and it divided fans. And some people would make these snarky comments about, well, you're just not a Halloween fan. You're just a Michael Myers fan, like that. But also it could have been a reference to the fact that Sidney Prescott was not around in Scream 6 and now she's back. Don't know. Anyway, I liked how the movie started out. I thought it had a very strong prologue. And in addition to the prologue, throughout the movie, there were multiple times where you would be thinking, oh, such and such is going to happen, or so-and-so is going to be right around the corner, and it would be something different. I thought that was handled pretty well for the most part. There were multiple jump scares, of course, which worked well for the crowd. And I felt that this movie was a little bit more emotionally focused than some of the recent entries. There was a very strong emphasis on the mother-daughter relationship that Sidney had. Her daughter's name is Tatum, named after her best friend from the first movie. And they're having a bit of a rough patch in their relationship because Sidney wants to protect her from the dangers and yet is struggling with the realization that maybe she should have prepared her. And I saw those elements of the movie as kind of being a narrative on parenthood and preparing your children for the world and wanting to protect them. But if you protect them too much, then you leave them vulnerable and they can't figure out things for themselves or protect themselves, stuff like that. So I appreciated that mother-daughter connection and relationship that was very strong in here. I felt that the acting overall was pretty solid, especially during those emotional moments regarding Sidney and her daughter Tatum. I also appreciated that in a lot of cases, most of the cases, the characters who were being pursued by Ghostface, they put up a real fight. I thought that some of the kills were pretty creative. There were also many times where the characters were pretty smart. Not always. There were multiple times that they fell back into that sort of, dumb character decision trope thing that happens, like keep beating him till he's dead. Shoot him in the head till he's dead, that sort of thing, instead of trying to walk around a fallen bad guy before you're sure that they're actually dead, that sort of thing. That is so tropey. I don't like that. I really wish they would do a better job at working around those issues. It wasn't enough to make me completely annoyed, but there were members of the audience that were like, don't do that. No, don't do that. They're not dead. That sort of thing. So I wasn't the only one that picked up on those things. And I think you will too, whenever you get around to watching it. As far as the mystery and the reveals, there are a lot of very glaring red herring situations that happen, and I wasn't really fooled by them. I will say that when the reveals happened, and I do like that they tried to keep you guessing about a certain character, but when the reveals happened, I can't say I was surprised. In fact, I kind of figured that. And I'm not going to go into detail, but I don't know if it's just that I've watched so many movies and horror movies, and you just kind of pick up on things and you start to think to yourself, that's the bad person. And that happened in here. And so when the reveal was made, I wasn't completely shocked or surprised. I just didn't know what was that connection that made this person the one that was behind the mask. And I felt that the story did a pretty decent job at explaining that, even though it kind of felt a little bit cartoonish, which is the way a lot of the movies have been feeling anyway. I mean, how many times really can Sidney Prescott go through something like this without it feeling really repetitive and silly, But the cameos were fun. And there were multiple cameos in here and callbacks and references to the other films. There was one death that occurred that I thought for sure they were going to almost completely mimic what had happened in the first movie, but that wasn't the case. I'm not sure how well it would have worked, but I think it might have been cooler than what ended up happening to this particular character. I am being very vague, I know. Maybe I'll talk about it with you guys in the comments. As far as any cons to this story, I've really touched on most, if not all of them. Trope stuff, characters sometimes stopping short when they could have pressed the advantage. Plot convenience moments. There's a character that discovers something about another character, and the way it was discovered was really ridiculous. That didn't work for me. I felt like that was a pretty weak moment. The stuff about the killer being able to survive pretty extreme injuries and bounce back from them, while the victims not so much. However, as far as the victims go, in the last Scream movie, I do remember specifically being annoyed that the victims could sometimes withstand crazy injuries and still be functional. Of course, the killer pretty much always bounces back from a lot of bad things that happen, but the contrast between those two was pretty evident in this film. I really wish they would have scaled stuff like that back a little bit, keep it more grounded, even though this did feel more grounded in a lot of ways than the past movie, or at least the past two movies, because those are the more recent ones that I remember. But still, I think dialing it back a skosh would have helped it quite a bit more. These are not huge complaints. As a whole, I actually really enjoyed this film. I didn't think I would hate it, but I was not sure if I would enjoy it more than, let's say, the first three. I figured I'd probably enjoy it more than Scream 6 because I wasn't super crazy about Scream 6, as I've already said. But I did appreciate the more grounded sort of trying to keep things based a bit more in reality and draw on this emotional connection between Sidney and her daughter, though they did do emotional stuff, especially in Scream 5 between the sisters. But this one landed a bit better for me than the other two films did. It's still not better than the first. Nothing's going to beat the first, but I thought it was fairly solid for what it was. The emotional core helped elevate it. It was a fun crowd experience, and I think it's worth watching for fans, especially for fans of Sidney Prescott. No, if you like Scream, I think you'll probably enjoy this film for the most part. Now, I have not looked at critic reviews of this, but from what I understand, it's getting review bombed for reasons which are ridiculous to me. At any rate, that's all I have to say for now about Scream 7. If you guys get the chance to check it out, let me know what you think. I have a feeling it's going to perform fairly well. I think it's going to get pretty good word of mouth. All right, you guys. Bye.